In the heart of history, there exists a figure whose name has faded into the shadows of time. Yet her actions shaped the very fate of an empire. What if I told you that a queen, whose legacy was nearly lost to the sands of time, defied all odds, leaving an indelible mark on the world? The untold story of this lost queen is one of power, intrigue, and a vision that altered the course of history. Stay with us as we uncover the captivating tale of a ruler whose legacy was almost forgotten, but whose impact cannot be erased. If you're fascinated by untold stories from history, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this with anyone who loves discovering the past's hidden treasures. Imagine a world where the name of one of history's most powerful queens is almost entirely forgotten. Her empire, once vast and influential, now stands in the shadows of time, her story buried beneath centuries of dust. This queen, though, was not just a ruler. She was a force that changed the fate of an entire civilization. But how did such a monumental figure slip into obscurity? Her name is nearly lost, but the echo of her reign lingers in the fragments of history, accounts of a mysterious ruler who led with wisdom and strength, whose decisions shaped the empire's destiny. Over time, however, her name was overshadowed by others, and the empire she built slowly crumbled into myths and half-forgotten tales. Yet, as we dig deeper, the story of this lost queen begins to resurface. It's a story of power, ambition, and survival in a world that was hostile to women in positions of power. She was a queen who faced unimaginable odds, and her decisions not only impacted her empire, but also left an enduring legacy, one that would influence generations to come. Her story wasn't erased by time. It was just waiting to be rediscovered. But who was she? And why is it that the pages of history barely mention her? As we dive into the depths of her empire's rise and fall, we'll unravel the life of the queen who defied expectations and changed everything. The history books often write about empires and kings, painting grand pictures of their conquests and legacies. But it's in the forgotten corners of history where stories like hers are often tucked away. This queen's reign was as extraordinary as it was brief. She came to power in a time when women in leadership were almost unheard of, yet she seized control in a world where men ruled supreme. She wasn't born into privilege, nor was she surrounded by political allies when she took the throne. Her rise to power was not marked by flashy celebrations or grandiose ceremonies. It was a quiet, yet powerful transformation, almost as if she had quietly slipped into history without the world realizing it. Yet her impact was profound. This queen, who ruled with grace and strategy, made decisions that would shape the future of her empire. However, it wasn't just her policies that left their mark. It was her ability to navigate a world that tried to push her down, to silence her. Her strength wasn't just in her governance, but in her ability to make waves in an ocean of patriarchy. Over time, however, the empire began to lose its footing. A series of invasions, betrayals, and political shifts slowly started to erode the glory of her reign. But the queen's story wasn't entirely lost. It was simply buried beneath the weight of a new era that preferred to write history in different ink. As we continue, we'll reveal how this queen's legacy came to light again after centuries of being hidden away. Before this queen ever took the throne, her empire was already in a state of flux, a world teetering on the edge of chaos. The empire was vast, rich in culture, but plagued by internal conflicts and external threats. From the moment this queen was born, the world around her seemed poised for change. but no one could have predicted the role she would play in steering the empire toward greatness. The rise of the empire itself was not a story of glory and triumph right from the start. It was a tale of unification, of different tribes, cultures, and city-states coming together to form something more powerful than they could ever be individually. Like many empires of the time, it was built on strategic alliances, military conquests, and the forging of new institutions. But unlike many others, this empire had the potential to change the course of history, not just because of its military prowess, but because of its ideas that were ahead of their time. The Queen was born into this world of transformation, but she didn't just observe from the sidelines. She was raised in the crucible of empire building, learning not only the art of diplomacy and warfare, but also the deep cultural significance of leadership. Her intellect became as vital as her strength, and she quickly rose through the ranks of those who would shape the empire's future. Her rise wasn't easy. She navigated treacherous political waters, dealing with rivals, shifting alliances, and a political landscape where women were seldom seen as equals. Yet, her ability to build coalitions and gain the trust of powerful factions made her a force to be reckoned with. She was ready to ascend to the throne, but the real question remained: would the world allow a woman to lead? In an empire dominated by men, where leadership was often defined by military might and strategic marriages, this queen's ascent to power was nothing short of revolutionary. From a young age, she was acutely aware of the disadvantages of her gender in a world that viewed women as mere pawns in the political game. Yet, rather than letting this limitation define her, she leveraged it as fuel for her ambitions. Her story is a testament to the power of resilience in the face of adversity. In a world where women were rarely seen as legitimate leaders, she had to fight not just for her seat at the table, but for the right to be heard. Whether it was within the royal court, among political allies, or on the battlefield, she constantly had to prove herself, not just as a woman, but as a leader with a vision far beyond the ordinary. In this male-dominated society, political maneuvering was a game that could make or break anyone, but especially a woman. Her political acumen was razor-sharp, allowing her to navigate treacherous alliances, neutralize enemies, and align herself with powerful factions that respected her mind, and not just her status as a ruler. She understood the importance of perception, how to project strength when she was expected to show vulnerability, how to silence doubters with actions rather than words. But her power wasn't just in politics. She proved that leadership could be more than just tactics and alliances. It was about vision, a vision that saw the empire not just as a conquest of land, but a melting pot of culture, prosperity, and progress. She aimed to break the norms, reshaping the idea of leadership and laying the foundation for her reign. Against all odds, the queen ascended to the throne in a way that seemed almost destined. But her rise wasn't driven by birthright or inheritance. It was earned. Born into a time of political unrest, her path to the crown was anything but typical. There were no grand celebrations, no formal coronation ceremony that announced the arrival of a new ruler. Instead, it was a series of calculated moves, moments of serendipity, and, at times, sheer determination that pushed her toward the throne. Her kingdom, once ruled by her father, had grown weak under the pressure of constant external threats and internal strife. With the empire teetering on the brink of collapse, the royal family fractured and the power structure became unstable. In such a moment of vulnerability, where most would see chaos, the queen saw opportunity. She didn't take power by force, though many assumed she would. Instead, she outmaneuvered her rivals, using her intelligence and charm to rally the people and the army to her side. In a kingdom where women were expected to remain in the background, she understood that to be recognized as a legitimate ruler, she had to convince everyone, from generals to commoners, that she was the right person to lead. It wasn't easy. At every turn, she faced resistance. Her political rivals were numerous, and many were skeptical of a woman leading the empire. Yet, the more they opposed her, the more determined she became. Her strategy was simple: prove that her leadership would result in stability and prosperity for all. By aligning herself with influential figures and promising reforms that would improve the lives of her people, she built a strong, loyal following. In the end, it wasn't just her birthright that placed her on the throne. It was her brilliance. Every empire has its defining moments, moments that shift the course of history. For this queen, one such moment arrived when the empire was on the brink of disintegration. Political instability was rampant, external enemies were closing in, and the loyalty of the people seemed to be wavering. But it was in the face of this crisis that the queen truly showed her strength, her vision and ability to act swiftly and decisively. Her reign had always been seen as tenuous, with many doubting whether she could hold the empire together. Yet, her most significant challenge came when an alliance of rival kingdoms moved to invade her lands, threatening to tear apart everything she had worked to build. An empire on the verge of collapse, with enemies at the gates, might have left many rulers in despair. But not her. In this critical moment, she made the bold decision to lead from the front, to command her forces personally. It was a gamble, one that many had told her not to take. But the queen knew that if she didn't lead by example, the empire would crumble under the weight of doubt. She didn't just issue orders from a safe distance. She fought beside her soldiers, leading them through one of the most pivotal battles of her reign. The battle was fierce, and the outcome uncertain. But when the dust settled, the queen emerged victorious. The alliance of invaders had been repelled, and her leadership had proven beyond doubt. This victory was the turning point for her empire. Not only did it solidify her position as a powerful ruler, but it also transformed the people's perception of her. She wasn't just a woman on a throne. She was a warrior queen, capable of leading her people through the worst of times. Behind every successful ruler lies a web of rivalries and alliances, a complex dance of politics, power, and survival. For this queen, the game was no different. Her reign wasn't just shaped by her own actions, but by the factions that both supported and sought to undermine her. Her political landscape was a minefield, where one wrong move could mean disaster. But she had learned early on that the key to ruling wasn't just about being stronger than your enemies, it was about being smarter. The queen's rise to power had already ruffled many feathers, and her position was never secure. Despite her victory in battle, many within the empire still viewed her leadership with suspicion. Some of her closest advisers, once loyal, became rivals, questioning her ability to govern effectively. The ruling elite, mostly men, had always seen a woman in power as an anomaly, something to be challenged rather than respected. But the queen was no stranger to the art of political maneuvering. She knew that to secure her place, she needed both powerful allies and the loyalty of the common people. She began to form strategic alliances with the very people who once opposed her: military generals, noble families, and even some of her former rivals. In doing so, she brought them into her circle, not just as supporters, but as partners. Her alliances were not based on blind loyalty, but on mutual benefit. She offered them power, land, and influence, while they provided her with the strength and resources needed to defend her empire. These calculated partnerships would become the foundation of her reign, allowing her to outwit her enemies and strengthen the empire's core. But even as she built these alliances, her rivals plotted in the shadows, and the queen knew that one betrayal could unravel it all. It wasn't just power that drove this queen, it was her vision for the future of her empire. Unlike many rulers who focused solely on conquering lands or solidifying their own rule, she looked beyond the present. She understood that the strength of her empire wasn't just in its military might, but in its people, culture, and future potential. One of her first acts as queen was to invest in infrastructure, laying the groundwork for a prosperous and sustainable future. Her empire's roads were improved, trade routes were expanded, and markets flourished as the economy grew. But the queen's true genius lay in her ability to see the bigger picture, to recognize that true power came not from what was gained in the moment, but from what could be built for future generations. She saw the value in education and innovation, believing that her people had the potential to build a civilization that could endure for centuries. She established libraries, supported scientific endeavors, and encouraged the arts. Her empire, she knew, would only thrive if it was built on knowledge and creativity. But her vision wasn't purely academic or cultural. She understood the importance of social welfare, ensuring that the most vulnerable in her empire had the support they needed to thrive. This made her reign popular among the common people, who saw her not as a distant monarch, but as a queen who cared for their well-being. Her vision for a prosperous and enlightened empire was clear, a land where innovation and compassion went hand in hand. But, as with all great visions, it came with challenges. Many of her political allies saw her progressive policies as a threat to the old ways of power. All empires, no matter how powerful, eventually face a decline. For this queen, the very empire she fought so hard to build began to crumble, not from external forces, but from within. Her reign, marked by bold reforms and groundbreaking policies, had created enemies in places she never expected. The very changes that had brought prosperity were now the seeds of internal division. As the empire grew, so did the challenges of ruling such a vast and diverse territory. The queen had always been an advocate for progress, but progress is a double-edged sword. New ideas clashed with traditional values. The noble families who once supported her felt threatened by the reforms she introduced. The military, which had once been her loyal ally, grew restless and dissatisfied with the shifting power dynamics. Her policies, intended to improve education, the economy, and social welfare, were met with resistance from those who benefited from the old systems of power. Her enemies within the court began to conspire against her, eroding her authority piece by piece. The queen's most loyal allies began to lose faith, and the cracks within the empire began to widen. Despite her vision, despite her strength, the empire couldn't survive the growing internal conflict. The queen's reign ended not with the roar of a battlefield, but with the whispers of betrayal and the quiet disintegration of the empire she had fought so hard to protect. Her people, once unified by her leadership, now found themselves divided as the empire's stability faltered. But even as the empire fell, the queen's legacy remained, a powerful reminder of what can be lost when an empire fails to evolve with its time. For centuries the story of this remarkable queen lay dormant, buried beneath the layers of time. Her name, once spoken with reverence, had become a mere whisper in the winds of history. But as the years passed, and as history's tide shifted, scholars and historians began to uncover the pieces of her reign. Slowly but surely, the forgotten queen's legacy came to life again. The rediscovery wasn't sudden. It wasn't as if one historian uncovered a long-lost manuscript that revealed her name. No, it was a gradual unveiling, a collection of ancient texts, artifacts, and oral histories that slowly started to piece together the narrative of a queen who had once ruled a mighty empire. Researchers found fragments of old records, remnants of her court, and hidden manuscripts that hinted at her profound influence. Each new discovery chipped away at the myth of her disappearance. What scholars found was nothing short of astounding. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became that this queen had not just been a footnote in history, but a central figure whose impact had been far-reaching. Through the artifacts left behind, they learned of her policies, her vision, and her challenges. They discovered that her reign, while short-lived, had been an epoch of innovation, an era of both triumph and tragedy that shaped the course of history in ways no one had realized. The world began to take notice of this queen once again, and with her rediscovery came a renewed appreciation for the empire she had built. This queen, once lost to time, was now a symbol of resilience and the complex nature of power, a figure whose legacy could never truly be erased. Though the empire she built faded into history, the queen's legacy proved to be remarkably enduring. As historians uncovered more about her reign, it became clear that her influence didn't vanish when the empire crumbled. Instead, it seeped into the fabric of the future, leaving its mark on the generations that followed. Her vision for the empire, one that blended innovation with compassion, became a beacon for future leaders. Her policies on education, economic growth, and social welfare were ahead of her time, and many of her ideas were rediscovered and implemented centuries later, though often without realizing their origin. The Queen's focus on progressive reforms had laid the groundwork for an empire that could have thrived had it only been able to withstand the pressures of internal strife. In the centuries that followed, the Queen's story became a symbol of a woman who rose against the odds, who led with vision, and who transformed an empire. Her tale was woven into the legends of the region, and her actions were celebrated in poetry, art, and even political thought. She became a source of inspiration for leaders across the world, especially those who fought to break down barriers and create more inclusive, forward-thinking societies. Her legacy didn't just live on through the written word. It was in the philosophies of governance that sought to balance tradition with modernity. It was in the movements for social change that echoed her calls for equality and education. Her empire may have fallen, but the ideas she championed endured, reminding the world that leadership doesn't belong to the powerful few, but to those who can imagine a better future. In the end, this lost queen didn't just change the fate of an empire. She changed the fate of history itself.